Chapter 11 of the Holy War. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. The Holy War by John Bunyan. Chapter 11. Well, when the Sabbath day was come, they went to hear their subordinate preacher. But oh, how he did thunder and lighten this day! His text was that in the prophet Jonah, "They that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy." But there was then such power and authority in that sermon, and such a dejection seen in the countenances of the people that day, that the like hath seldom been heard or seen. The people, when sermon was done, were scarce able to go to their homes or to betake themselves to their employs the week after. They were so sermon smitten, and also so sermon sick by being smitten, that they knew not what to do. He did not only show to man's soul their sin, but did tremble before them under the sense of his own, still crying out of himself as he preached to them. Unhappy man that I am, that I should do so wicked a thing, that I, a preacher, whom the prince did set up to teach to man's soul his law, should myself live senseless and sottishly here, and be one of the first found in transgression. This transgression also fell within my precincts. I should have cried out against the wickedness, but I let man's soul lie wallowing in it, until it had driven Emmanuel from its borders. With these things he also charged all the lords and gentry of man's soul, to the almost distracting of them. About this time also there was a great sickness in the town of man's soul, and most of the inhabitants were greatly afflicted. Yea, the captains also, and men of war were brought thereby to a languishing condition, and that for a long time together, so that in case of an invasion nothing could to purpose now have been done, either by the townsmen or field officers. Oh, how many pale faces, weak hands, feeble knees, and staggering men were now seen to walk the streets of man's soul! Here were groans, there pants, and yonder lay those that were ready to faint. The garments too which Emmanuel had given them were but in a sorry case. Some were rent, some were torn, and all in a nasty condition. Some also did hang so loosely upon them that the next bush they came at was ready to pluck them off. After some time spent in this sad and desolate condition, the subordinate preacher called for a day of fasting, and to humble themselves for being so wicked against the great Shaddai and his Son. And he desired that Captain Boanerges would preach. So he consented to do it, and the day being come, and his text was this: "Cut it down, why cumbereth it the ground?" And a very smart sermon he made upon the place. First he showed what was the occasion of the words, namely, because the fig tree was barren. Then he showed what was retained in the sentence, namely, repentance or utter desolation. He then showed also by whose authority this sentence was pronounced, and that was by Shaddai himself. And lastly, he showed the reasons of the point, and then concluded his sermon. But he was very pertinent in the application, insomuch that he made poor man's soul tremble. For this sermon, as well as the former, wrought much upon the hearts of the men of man's soul. Yea, it greatly helped to keep awake those that were roused by the preaching that went before. So that now throughout the whole town there was little or nothing to be heard or seen but sorrow and mourning and woe. Now after sermon they got together and consulted what was best to be done. "But," said the subordinate preacher, "I will do nothing of mine own head, without advising with my neighbour, Mr. Godly Fear. For if he had aforehand understood more of the mind of our prince than we, I do not know but he also may have it now, even now we are turning again to virtue." So they called and sent for Mr. Godly Fear, and he forthwith appeared. Then they desired that he would further show his opinion about what they had best to do. Then said the old gentleman as followeth: "It is my opinion that this town of man's soul should, in this day of her distress, draw up and send an humble petition to their offended Prince Emmanuel, that he in his favour and grace will turn again unto you, and not keep anger for ever." When the townsmen had heard this speech, they did with one consent agree to his advice. So they did presently draw up their request, and the next was, but who shall carry it? At last they did all agree to send it by my Lord Mayor. So he accepted of the service, and addressed himself to his journey, and went and came to the court of Shaddai, whither Emmanuel the prince of man's soul was gone. But the gate was shut, and a strict watch kept thereat, so that the petitioner was forced to stand without for a great while together. Then he desired that some would go in to the prince, and tell him who stood at the gate, and what his business was. So one went and told to Shaddai, to Emmanuel his son, that the Lord Mayor of the town of Man's Soul stood without at the gate of the king's court, desiring to be admitted into the presence of the prince, the king's son. He also told what was the Lord Mayor's errand, both to the king and his son Emmanuel. But the prince would not come down, nor admit that the gate should be opened to him, but sent him an answer to this effect: They have turned their back unto me, and not their face. But now in the time of their trouble they say to me, Arise and save us. But can they not now go to Mr. Carnal Security, to whom they went when they turned from me, and make him their leader, their lord, and their protection now in their trouble? Why now in their trouble do they visit me, since in their prosperity they went astray? The answer made my Lord Mayor look black in the face. It troubled, it perplexed, it rent him sore. And now he began again to see what it was to be familiar with Dibelonians, such as Mr. Carnal Security was. When he saw that at court, as yet, there was little help to be expected, either for himself or friends in Man's Soul, he smote upon his breast and returned weeping, and all the way bewailing the lamentable state of Man's Soul. Well, when he was come within sight of the town, the elders and chief of the people of Man's Soul went out at the gate to meet him, and to salute him, and to know how he sped at court. But he told them his tale in so doleful a manner that they all cried out, and mourned, and wept. Wherefore they threw ashes and dust upon their heads, and put sackcloth upon their loins, and went crying out through the town of Man's Soul. The which, when the rest of the townsfolk saw, they all mourned and wept. This therefore was a day of rebuke and trouble, and of anguish to the town of Man's Soul, and also of great distress. After some time, when they had somewhat refrained themselves, they came together to consult again what by them was yet to be done, and they asked advice, as they did before, of that reverend Mr. Godly Fear, who told them that there was no way better than to do as they had done, nor would he that they should be discouraged at all with what they had met with at court. Yea, though several of their petitions should be answered with naught but silence or rebuke. For, said he, it is the way of the wise Shaddai to make men wait and to exercise patience, and it should be the way of them in want to be willing to stay his leisure. Then they took courage and sent again, and again, and again, and again. For there was not now one day nor an hour that went over Man's Soul's head, wherein a man might not have met upon the road one or other riding post, sounding the horn from Man's Soul to the court of the King Shaddai, and all with letters petitionary in behalf of and for the prince's return to Man's Soul. The road, I say, was now full of messengers going and returning and meeting one another, some from the court and some from Man's Soul, and this was the work of the miserable town of Man's Soul, all that long, that sharp, that cold and tedious winter. Now, if you have not forgot, you may yet remember that I told you before, that after Emmanuel had taken Man's Soul, yea, and after that he had new modelled the town, there remained in several lurking places of the corporation many of the old Dibelonians, that either came with the tyrant when he invaded and took the town, or that had there, by reason of unlawful mixtures, their birth and breeding and bringing up, and their holes, dens, and lurking places were in, under, or about the wall of the town. Some of their names are the Lord Fornication, the Lord Adultery, the Lord Murder, the Lord Anger, the Lord Lasciviousness, the Lord Deceit, the Lord Evil Eye, the Lord Blasphemy, and that horrible villain, the old and dangerous Lord Covetousness. These, as I told you, with many more, had yet their abode in the town of Man's Soul, and that after that Emmanuel had driven their prince Diabolus out of the castle. Against these the good prince did grant a commission to the Lord Wilbywill and others, yea, to the whole town of Man's Soul, to seek, take, secure, and destroy any or all that they could lay hands on, for that they were Dibelonians by nature, enemies to the prince, and those that sought to ruin the blessed town of Mansoul.